Okay, so good evening. It's a huge pleasure to be here and again on the virtual platform. It's wonderful to see Bessem. Hello, Bessem. Ian, Dimitri, who I don't often see either. So thank you both for inviting both Dimitri and myself to speak about part 2 of ACE, Alopecia Areata Consensus Expert Study that we did. Quite some time ago now. The first part, which was centered around the treatment, we presented about 2 years ago, again on this platform. So it's quite nice to be back to present the second part, which is on diagnosis and laboratory evaluation. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Neki Meyer. I'm a consultant dermatologist with a special interest in alopecia and scalp disorders. I completed a post-CCT fellowship in Australia under Rodney Sinclair, and I've been back for some time. I run a tertiary service hair loss clinic at Mersey and West Lancashire NHS Trust. I also see private hair patients at Spire Liverpool. So Dimitri can introduce himself, I think. This is his slide.
Hi, guys. I'm similar to Neki. I also did a fellowship with Rod over in Melbourne, and we overlapped and we worked in rooms beside each other, so spent a lot of time talking to each other, and I hope I can say have continued that friendship ever since. There's people who meet us at conference and realize that we're two separate people because we seem to go together with a lot of the different publications. When you meet us together, we do look slightly different. Yeah, Neki's much better looking than me. And I do a lot of other things. I work mainly seeing hair patients 4 days a week. I do hair transplantation, FUE, FUT. I also see a lot of the kind of more unusual hair disorders because I've been lucky in coming back to Ireland. There wasn't really much of a presence with respect to dermatology and hair disorders before I got back. And ever since, everyone has been kindly sending me all the most complicated and unusual cases they can find, which has been really interesting, but takes a lot of thinking. So you end up tired at the end of every day. I've also got a bit of an interest in health informatics. I run registries, develop registries, and I try and keep up with some research as well. So that's me. Back to you, Neki.
Thank you. So I think these are your disclosures, Dimitri.
Yeah, it looks like I do like no work, that I just spend all my time talking to pharma companies. It's so not true. I just basically every time somebody talks to me or I have a meeting or I do a presentation, I try and write it down so no one can accuse me of not being honest.
Perfect. Thank you. So the ACE project that we did couldn't have been possible without our core team. So the core team was obviously Rodney Sinclair, but also Kath York, who is South African, Bevan Boyrell, who came in after Dimitri, and Leiter, who's over on your left-hand side at the front. And then this is well, largely the bigger group. You'll recognize some faces, Jerry Shapiro, Wilma Bergfeld, Elise Olson, closer to home, Andrew Messenger, Matt Harries, not so closer to home, Brett King. So there are lots of familiar faces there. And this was after our face-to-face meeting in Sitges. So we presented this to yourselves, really focusing on the treatments of alopecia areata. And at the time, I suppose we didn't realize how important it would be. It was very difficult to put together, but also it's really been a very important paper in collecting everyone's thoughts at the time as to how things were going to be in the near future, particularly about the JAK inhibitors. So a lot of it really stemmed from a local consensus paper that was done in Australia. And a lot of these projects start with, small group discussion, and that small group was myself, Dimitri, and Rod Sinclair, round a table, just talking about how we could, sort of build upon the work that we did with the local consensus paper. And those of you that know Rod Sinclair, he has plenty of ideas. So this was one of those that we didn't, really know how to how big it'd be. And as you know, a lot of this was stemming from the change in landscape, in the therapeutic landscape for alopecia areata, particularly with the JAK inhibitors. So we'll go through the findings, and I'll go through this a little bit sort of carefully, and then Dimitri will go through the discussion. So when we talked about epidemiology, and there were lots of questions, but in epidemiology, we focused on a few questions. We were interested in ethnicity, we were interested in seasonal triggers, we were interested in climate and geographical latitude. And what we said at the time, and obviously, there's been some research since, but at the time we said, ethnicity, whether you're African American or Caucasian, does not really alter the natural history of prognosis of alopecia areata. But we also said that that geographical latitude, so whether you're from the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere, does it influence the risk of a poor response to treatment? So, as you know, there's been some studies since, there's been a epidemiology study in the UK and some studies in the US who have since demonstrated that people who are of sort of sort of type 5 or skin of color are more likely to get AU or AT. So there have been studies subsequently, but we're really relating to what the consensus was at the time in 2019. We then went on to etiopathogenesis. Now, this was really to explore, what's the role of family history? What's the role of genetics? What's the role of allergic comorbidities? We see in pediatric alopecia areata, sometimes triggers with seasonal change. So, is that important? Comorbidities, vitamin D, nutritional, thyroid disease, stress, acute stress, chronic stress, an environmental trigger. We looked at this in detail and tried to get an idea about whether any of these are particularly important in the pathogenesis. And nearly half of the questions in these categories, we achieved consensus in 46%.